The Varian colony ship Gentle Dawn floated like a broken jewel in the cold darkness of space. Its beautiful crystal walls, once clear and shining, now had ugly cracks running through them. Air was slowly leaking out into the empty void. Inside the ship, Commander Veltar stood frozen at his control station, watching the scanner screens with pure terror in his heart. 12 enormous ships had appeared from nowhere. These weren't normal ships, they looked alive somehow, like giant metal insects with parts that moved and twisted. The harvesters had found them. Veltar knew exactly what these creatures did. They ate everything. Every planet, every asteroid, every living thing they could find. They turned it all into fuel for their endless hunger. "Sir, they're already starting," whispered his second officer, her voice shaking. "Look at the outer asteroids." Veltar watched in horror as the harvester ships extended long metal tentacles toward the rocky asteroids floating near their colony. The tentacles grabbed the rocks and pulled them inside the ships. In minutes, solid rock became nothing but dust and energy. Soon, they would do the same thing to the Gentle Dawn and everyone inside it. The Varians were not fighters. They came from a peaceful world with soft gravity and gentle weather. Their bodies were delicate, almost see-through, and they could barely lift their own weight. They had never needed weapons or armor. They solved problems with talking and thinking, not fighting. But you can't talk to the harvesters. They don't listen. They just eat. "Send out the emergency signal," Veltar said, his voice barely a whisper. His skin was changing colors rapidly, bright flashes of yellow and red that showed how scared he was. All Varians did this when they felt strong emotions. Right now, his fear was impossible to hide. "Broadcasting on all frequencies, sir. Emergency code 77 Alpha. Full distress protocol." The message shot out across space at the speed of light. "This is Varian colony ship Gentle Dawn. We are under attack by Harvester fleet. 12 enemy vessels detected. We need help right now. Our location is attached to this message. Please, anyone who receives this, we are dying." Now came the waiting. The Galactic Council had peacekeeping ships, but they were far away. The closest Council fleet was probably 8 days of travel time from here. The Varians would be dead in 8 hours, maybe less. Still, Veltar hoped. Maybe someone closer would hear their cry for help. His communications officer was a young Varian named Kessera. She kept checking and rechecking the radio equipment, her 4 hands dancing over the controls. "Sir, I'm getting something." "Wait, yes, there's a response coming in." Veltar felt a tiny spark of hope. "Is it the Council? The Peacekeepers?" Kessera frowned, her skin turning a confused purple color. "No, sir. This is different. The signal is coming from much closer. Maybe 6 hours away. Put it through the speakers." Static filled the bridge, followed by a voice that made every Varian freeze in terror. The voice was rough and hard, like gravel grinding together. It belonged to a species that every civilized being in the galaxy feared. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earth ship Razorback. We got your distress call loud and clear. Human fleet is on the way. We'll be there in 6 hours. Just hang tight." The bridge went completely silent. Veltar felt his heart beating so fast he thought it might burst. His skin was flashing every color at once: fear, shock, confusion, and something that might have been despair. Humans. The Deathworlders. The monsters from the nightmare planet called Earth. Every child in the galaxy knew the stories. Earth was a world of constant disasters. Earthquakes that could swallow cities. Storms that could destroy continents. Oceans full of creatures with too many teeth. The air itself could kill you if you breathed it wrong. And the humans who lived there were just as dangerous as their world. The Galactic Council had tried to make contact with humanity years ago. The human ambassador had crushed the Council representative's hand just by shaking it. That same ambassador had eaten something called spicy food that would have poisoned most species. During the meeting, he had casually mentioned surviving something called a car crash that involved hitting a solid object at high speed. For humans, this was normal. For everyone else, it sounded like attempted suicide. The council had quickly decided that humans were too dangerous to be allowed into civilized space. They were banned from most star systems. Ships that encountered human vessels were told to run away as fast as possible. There were stories, probably true stories, about human ships ramming enemy vessels just to win fights. About human soldiers who could fight even after losing arms or legs. About humans who would rather die than surrender. "Sir," Kessera whispered, "what do we do?" Veltar looked around his bridge at his terrified crew. Outside, the harvester ships were getting closer. In a few hours, those metal monsters would tear apart the gentle dawn and turn everyone inside into fuel. But in 6 hours, the humans would arrive. The question was simple: which death would be worse? At least the harvesters would kill them quickly. When the human ships arrived, it was like watching a controlled explosion happen in slow motion. Space itself seemed to scream as 12 dark vessels tore through the fabric of reality. The energy blast from their hyperspace exit lit up the gentle dawn's hull like lightning, and every variant on the bridge instinctively ducked for cover. "By the void," whispered Kessera, staring at her scanner readings. "Sir, the radiation levels from their arrival should have killed everything within 10,000 kilometers. How are we still alive?" Veltar couldn't answer. He was too busy staring at the human ships through the main viewport. These weren't like any vessels he'd ever seen before. Where Varian ships were smooth and elegant, like works of art floating through space, the human ships looked like they'd been built in a weapons factory. They were all sharp angles and brutal lines, covered in armor plating that looked thick enough to stop asteroids. Gun turrets stuck out from every surface, and the hulls were painted in dark colors that seemed to absorb light. The biggest ship at the front had words painted on its side in bright white letters, UES Razorback. Even the name sounded violent. Captain Morrison's voice came through their communication system again, and this time it was much clearer. It was a human male, probably middle-aged from the sound of it. His voice carried an authority that made even the Varian crew straighten up without thinking about it. "Gentle Dawn, this is Captain Jake Morrison commanding the Terran Defense Fleet. We can see your situation from here. Those are definitely harvesters, and they're already starting to feed on your outer asteroid belt. I recommend you get your ship behind that moon over there and stay put while we handle this." Veltar's hands shook as he activated the communication system. Speaking to a human felt like sticking his head into a predator's mouth, but he had to try reasoning with them. "Captain Morrison," he managed to say, though his voice cracked with fear, "we are very grateful that you responded to our distress call. Truly, we didn't expect anyone to come so quickly. But perhaps it would be wiser to wait for the Galactic Council peacekeeping forces. They have better equipment for this sort of situation, and the Council forces won't be here for 8 days, Morrison interrupted, his tone matter-of-fact and brutal. "I pulled their fleet positions before we jumped. By the time your precious peacekeepers show up, you'll all be harvested biomass floating in space. We're moving to engage the enemy now." The communication cut off, leaving the Varian bridge in stunned silence. 8 days. Veltar knew Morrison was right. The harvesters would strip their ship clean in less than 8 hours, let alone 8 days. But the alternative was trusting their lives to the most feared species in the galaxy. "Sir," called out his navigation officer, "the human ships are moving. Look at those acceleration readings." Through the viewport, they watched the human fleet begin its approach toward the harvester ships. The Varians gasped in unison as the scanner showed impossible numbers. The human vessels were accelerating at speeds that should have turned any living crew into paste against the back walls of their ships. No species could survive forces like that. It was physically impossible. "Are they trying to kill themselves?" Kessera asked in wonder. But the humans were just getting started. As the Razorback led the charge toward the enemy, something even more bizarre began to happen. Music started playing. Not just any music, this was loud, aggressive, pounding music that seemed designed to make people want to fight. The humans were broadcasting it on every frequency, including the emergency channels. On the bridge of the Razorback, Lieutenant Diana Rodriguez was grinning like a wild animal as she checked her weapon systems. She was a small woman by human standards, but her eyes had a gleam in them that would have terrified most predators. Her fingers danced over the control panels with practiced ease, arming missiles and charging energy cannons. "Captain," she called out over the thundering music, "all weapons are hot and ready. Targeting systems are locked onto the lead harvester. Ready to show these metal bastards what Earth sends its regards with." Captain Morrison sat in his command chair like he was settling in to watch a relaxing movie instead of facing a fleet of world-destroying machines. His voice was calm and steady when he gave the order that would start the most brutal space battle the Varians had ever witnessed. "Light them up, Rodriguez. Show them why they should have stayed in dark space." The human ships opened fire all at once, and space itself seemed to catch fire. Missiles streaked toward the harvester fleet while energy beams hot enough to melt steel cut through the darkness. The Razorback's main cannon fired a projectile that glowed like a small sun as it raced toward its target. But the harvesters weren't defenseless. They began returning fire with weapons that could crack planets. Their biomechanical hulls opened up to reveal rows of organic cannons that spat acid and plasma at the approaching human ships. What happened next made every Varian on the Gentle Dawn question everything they thought they knew about space combat. Instead of trying to dodge the incoming fire like any sane species would do, the humans flew straight into it. They took hits that should have destroyed their ships and kept coming. One human vessel lost its entire front section to a harvester plasma blast, but it just kept firing its remaining weapons and accelerating toward the enemy. "They're completely insane," Veltar whispered, unable to look away from the battle. "They're going to get themselves killed." But deep down, he was starting to realize something that both terrified and amazed him. The humans weren't just willing to die to save a ship full of strangers. They were eager to do it. They were actually enjoying this fight. And somehow, impossibly, they were winning. What happened next shattered everything the Varians thought they knew about space combat. The human ships didn't just attack the harvesters, they did something so insane that no civilized species had ever even considered it. They flew straight into the enemy formation and started turning their own ships into bombs. The UES Thunderstrike was the first to do it. Captain Brooks made the decision in less than 3 seconds. His ship had taken heavy damage from harvester acid cannons, and his hull was already buckling under the pressure. Instead of retreating or trying to repair the damage, he did something that made every Varian watching scream in horror. "All hands, this is the captain," Brooks announced over his ship's communication system. "We're going to ram speed. Engine room, give me everything the reactor can handle. I want maximum power to the drives." "Sir," his navigation officer called out, "at that speed, the impact will." "I know exactly what it'll do, son. That's the point." The Thunderstrike's engines roared to life with power levels that should have melted the ship from the inside. The vessel accelerated toward the largest harvester ship at speeds that were physically impossible for any crew to survive. The forces involved should have liquefied every human on board, but somehow they kept working, kept fighting, right up until the moment of impact. When the Thunderstrike hit the harvester vessel, both ships simply vanished in a flash of light brighter than a star. The explosion was so massive that the shockwave damaged ships thousands of kilometers away. For a brief moment, there was a new sun burning in the Kepler system, and when it faded, 2 entire vessels had been completely destroyed. "By the void," Veltar whispered, his skin flashing colors so rapidly it hurt to look at. "They're completely insane. They just killed themselves to destroy one enemy ship." But the humans were just getting started with their impossible tactics. Colonel Tyler Hayes commanded a battalion of human marines on the UES Phoenix. When the harvester ships closed to within boarding range, he made a decision that would have been considered suicide by any other species. He was going to take his soldiers and attack the enemy ships directly. "Listen up, Marines," Hayes announced to his troops as they suited up in their powered armor. "We're going EVA to board those metal bastards. The enemy ships don't have airlocks compatible with our systems, so we're going through their hull the hard way." The human soldiers put on armor that was more like walking tanks than protective suits. The armor was thick, powered by small reactors, and covered with weapons. But what they were planning to do would test even this equipment beyond its limits. Hayes led his Marines out of the Phoenix through the cargo bay doors. They launched themselves into hard vacuum using nothing but small rocket packs and magnetic boots. Space is a place where no living thing should be able to survive. It's airless, freezing cold, and filled with radiation that kills most species in minutes. But the humans just floated through it like they were swimming in water. The harvester ships had never encountered anything like this before. Their biomechanical sensors weren't designed to track individual soldiers floating through space. They were built to fight other ships, not tiny figures in powered armor who could survive in conditions that would kill almost any other life form. Hayes and his Marines attached themselves to the hull of the nearest harvester vessel using magnetic clamps. Then they did something that made the Varians watching from the gentle dawn question reality itself. They started cutting through the enemy ship's armor with portable welding torches. "Breach in Sector 7, Hayes reported over the radio as his team cut a hole big enough to crawl through. "We're inside their ship now. Beginning search and destroy operations." Inside the harvester vessel, the Marines found corridors filled with mechanical drones and organic computer systems. The drones tried to fight them, but they weren't designed for close combat with heavily armed soldiers. The humans moved through the ship like a plague, destroying everything they found. But Hayes had an even more brutal plan. His team located the ship's internal airlocks and sealed them shut using their welding equipment. They trapped entire sections of harvester drones inside sealed compartments. Then they planted explosive charges throughout the ship. "Fire in the hole," Hayes announced calmly, and the charges detonated simultaneously. The harvester ship tore itself apart from the inside as explosions ripped through its hull. Hayes and his Marines were already on their way back to the Phoenix, having completed their mission in less than 20 minutes. But perhaps the most shocking moment came from Captain Rebecca Chang, commander of the UES Defiant. Her ship had been crippled by harvester plasma fire, and her reactor was going critical. She could have evacuated her crew and abandoned ship. Instead, she made a choice that stunned everyone listening to the radio frequencies. "This is Captain Chang," she announced, her voice steady despite the alarms blaring in the background. "My reactor is about to overload, and I can't stop it. I'm going to use this ship as a guided missile. All crew members, get to the escape pods now." "Captain," her first officer protested, "you can still evacuate. We can set the ship on automatic." "Negative," Chang replied firmly. "I need to manually control the approach to make sure I hit all three of those harvester ships clustered together. Someone has to stay and fly this bird all the way in." The Defiant's crew evacuated in escape pods while Chang remained alone on the bridge. She piloted her dying ship toward a group of 3 harvester vessels that had formed up to concentrate their firepower. The enemy ships tried to destroy the Defiant before it reached them, but Chang flew with skill that bordered on the supernatural, dodging their attacks while her ship literally fell apart around her. Her final transmission was heard clearly across all radio frequencies, and it would be remembered long after the battle ended: "Tell my kids I kept my promise. Mom's coming home a hero." The Defiant struck all 3 harvester ships simultaneously, and the resulting explosion lit up space like a supernova. When the light faded, 4 ships had been completely destroyed. The Varians watched all of this in stunned silence. These humans were using tactics that violated every rule of civilized warfare. They were turning their own ships into weapons, boarding enemy vessels in hard vacuum, and sacrificing themselves without hesitation. It was brutal, insane, and completely effective. Somehow, impossibly, the humans were winning. When the battle finally ended, the cost of victory became clear. The space around Kepler 438 was filled with debris from destroyed ships, both harvester and human. Of the 12 human vessels that had arrived to help, only 3 were still capable of flight. 6 had been completely destroyed, blown apart by harvester weapons or sacrificed in ramming attacks. 3 more were so badly damaged they could barely keep their life support systems running. The surviving human ships looked like they had been through hell itself. Their hulls were cracked and blackened, leaking atmosphere and coolant into space. Radiation alarms were screaming on every vessel, warning of dangerous levels that would kill most species within hours. But somehow, the humans just kept working. On the bridge of the UES Razorback, Captain Morrison was trying to coordinate rescue operations while blood ran down the left side of his face from plasma burns that had nearly taken his eye. His uniform was torn and scorched, and he moved carefully because of broken ribs. But his voice was still steady and calm as he gave orders to his crew. "Johnson, I need a damage report on all surviving vessels. Rodriguez, start organizing medical teams for the Varian ship. Patterson, see if you can get our long-range communications working again. We need to contact Earth Command and let them know the situation." All around him, his crew worked with the same determination they had shown during the battle. Lieutenant Rodriguez had a bandage wrapped around her head where shrapnel had cut her scalp, but she was still at her station running diagnostics on the ship's systems. Ensign Patterson's left arm was in a sling, yet he was using his good hand to repair communication equipment. These injuries would have put most species in the hospital for weeks, but the humans treated them like minor inconveniences. The first shuttle that launched from the damaged human ships wasn't carrying weapons or soldiers. Instead, it was packed with medical supplies, food, water, and emergency equipment. The humans were bringing help to the Varians, even though their own ships were falling apart around them. Corporal Tommy Kim was one of the Marines who had survived the boarding actions. His right arm hung useless at his side, held in place by a makeshift sling torn from his uniform. Burns from harvester acid covered the left side of his body, and he walked with a limp from a piece of shrapnel in his leg. But when the shuttle docked with the Gentle Dawn, he was the first one through the airlock, carrying medical supplies in his good arm. The Varians who met him at the docking port backed away in fear. They had just watched this same human cutting through harvester ships with explosive weapons. Now he was standing in their corridor, wounded and dangerous looking, and they didn't know what to expect. But Kim's first words shocked them completely. "Hey there," he said gently, his voice soft and reassuring. "We're here to help. Anyone hurt over here? We brought doctors and medical gear." A small Varian child, barely old enough to walk, had been injured when the Gentle Dawn was damaged by the battle's shockwaves. Her parents were too scared to approach the human Marine, but Kim noticed the little one crying in the corner. Without hesitation, he knelt down and carefully picked her up with his good arm. "Easy there, kiddo," he said in the same gentle voice he might use with his own children back on Earth. "I know you're scared, but everything's going to be okay now. Doc Williams is going to take real good care of you." The child's parents watched in amazement as this fearsome warrior, still bleeding from his own wounds, carried their daughter to the shuttle's medical bay with infinite care. His hands, which had been wielding weapons of destruction just hours ago, were now as gentle as a nurse's. Dr. Jennifer Williams was already setting up a field hospital inside the shuttle. She had taken plasma burns across her back during the battle when her ship's medical bay was hit, but she worked through the pain without complaint. When Kim brought the Varian child to her, she immediately began treating the little one's injuries with equipment the Varians had never seen before. "She'll be fine," Dr. Williams told the child's parents in their own language, which she had learned from the translation programs during the flight to Kepler 438. "Just some minor cuts and bruises. She's very brave." Commander Veltar watched all of this with growing confusion. These were the same humans who had just fought the most brutal space battle he had ever witnessed. They had used tactics that would give civilized beings nightmares. They had turned their own ships into bombs and walked through hard vacuum to board enemy vessels. But now they were acting like like healers. Like protectors. He found Captain Morrison in the Razorback's medical bay, where the human was receiving treatment for his injuries while continuing to coordinate rescue efforts. Half of Morrison's face was covered in bandages, and his voice was hoarse from smoke inhalation, but he was still reviewing casualty reports and organizing supply runs to the variant ship. "Captain Morrison," Veltar said hesitantly as he approached the human commander. "I must ask you something that I do not understand. Why did you do this? Why did your people sacrifice so much for complete strangers? We are not allies. We have never even met before today. Your species gains nothing from saving us." Morrison looked up from the data pad he was studying, his remaining good eye focusing on the variant commander. The burns on his face looked painful, and Veltar could see exhaustion in every line of the human's body. But Morrison's voice was firm and clear when he answered. "Because somebody had to," he said simply, as if it was the most obvious thing in the universe. "Those harvesters would have killed all of you, and then they would have moved on to kill someone else. We couldn't let that happen." "But the cost," Veltar pressed. "You lost so many ships, so many of your people. Was it worth it?" Morrison was quiet for a moment, looking down at the list of names on his casualty report. Good people. Friends. Crew members who had families waiting for them back on Earth. Finally, he looked back up at Veltar with something that might have been a smile. "Ask me that question again when you're holding your grandchildren someday," Morrison said. "Because that's what humans do. We show up when someone needs help. We fight when someone can't fight for themselves. And we pay whatever price we have to pay to make sure the good people get to go home safe." At that moment, Veltar began to understand something that would change how his people viewed humanity forever. These weren't monsters. They were something far more dangerous to their enemies and far more precious to their friends. They were guardians. 8 days after the battle, when the Galactic Council's golden ships finally arrived at Kepler 438, they expected to find a disaster zone. Instead, they discovered something that shocked them to their core. The harvester threat had been completely eliminated, and the human survivors were running the most organized rescue operation the Council had ever seen. Admiral Rachel Thompson was the senior surviving human officer, having taken command when Captain Morrison was hospitalized with severe plasma burns. Her ship, the UES Phoenix, was held together with emergency patches and sheer willpower, but she ran the relief effort like a perfectly oiled machine. Human engineers were rebuilding Varian life support systems. Human doctors were treating injured civilians. Human supply ships were delivering food, water, and medical equipment with clockwork precision. The Council fleet consisted of 12 pristine vessels that looked like flying works of art. Their hulls were smooth and golden, designed more for showing off wealth and power than for actual fighting. The flagship was 3 times larger than any human ship, with enough luxury accommodations for a small city. Its commander was Admiral Zeth Kaler, a being from the Centauri Republic who considered himself far superior to the primitive species that made up most of the galaxy. "This is Admiral Zeth Kaler commanding the Galactic Council Peace Fleet," came the transmission from the Golden Flagship. His voice carried the kind of arrogance that made it clear he thought he was talking to inferior beings. "We are here to handle the crisis situation. Human vessels, you will withdraw your forces immediately and return to your own territory." Admiral Thompson was in the middle of coordinating a supply drop to the Varian refugee camps when the Council transmission came through. She looked up from her logistics reports with an expression that would have made her enemies back on Earth very nervous. Her uniform was stained with coolant fluid from helping repair damaged life support systems, and she hadn't slept in 3 days, but her voice was perfectly controlled when she responded. "Council Command, this is Admiral Thompson of the Terran Defense Fleet. The immediate crisis has been resolved. All harvester vessels have been destroyed, and we are currently providing humanitarian aid to the survivors. We will continue our operations until the situation is fully stabilized." "Negative," Zeth Kaler replied sharply. "This is now a Council matter. Your assistance is no longer required or wanted. Withdraw immediately." That's when something happened that nobody expected. A new voice cut into the communication channel, and it wasn't human. It was Commander Veltar, speaking from the bridge of the Gentle Dawn with a firmness in his voice that surprised everyone who heard it. Council Command, this is Varian Colony Representative Veltar. I am speaking as the official representative of all Varian civilians in this system. We formally request that the Terran Defense Fleet remain in our territory to provide continued protection. Furthermore, we wish to establish formal trade agreements and mutual defense pacts with the human government. The silence that followed lasted for nearly 30 seconds. When Admiral Zethkaler finally responded, his voice was filled with shock and disgust. Commander Veltar, surely you cannot be serious. These are Deathworlders. They are dangerous, primitive beings who solve problems with violence. The Council has classified them as too hazardous for civilized contact. You cannot possibly want to associate with such creatures. Veltar's response made every human listening smile with fierce pride. Dangerous? Veltar asked, his skin blazing with colors that showed his anger. You want to know what's dangerous? I'll tell you what's dangerous. What's dangerous is a galaxy where 12 harvester ships can attack a defenseless colony, and the mighty Galactic Council shows up 8 days late with excuses. What's dangerous is a civilization that values pretty ships over the courage to protect innocent lives. His voice grew stronger as he continued. You call them primitive because they use violence to solve problems. Let me tell you what I saw these humans do. Yes, they fought with a brutality that terrified me. They turned their own ships into weapons. They walked through hard vacuum to board enemy vessels. They sacrificed themselves without hesitation to save people they had never met. The communication channel carried his words to every ship in the system, human and council alike. But do you know what else they did? Veltar continued. The first shuttle that reached us after the battle wasn't carrying weapons or soldiers demanding payment for their services. It was carrying medical supplies and food. A human marine with a broken arm personally carried my injured niece to safety, speaking to her in gentle words while his own blood stained his uniform. Veltar paused, letting that sink in before delivering his final blow. They brought doctors before they brought diplomats. They sang lullabies to our children while their own ships were still burning. They worked for 3 days straight to repair our life support systems, and not once did they ask for anything in return. The galaxy calls them monsters, but I have seen what kind of monsters they become when innocent people are threatened. They become the kind of monsters that nightmares fear. Admiral Zethkaler tried to interrupt, but Veltar wasn't finished. You want to know why we choose the humans over the Council? Because when we needed help, they came. When we were dying, they fought. When we were broken, they rebuilt us. And when you finally show up, 8 days too late, your first concern isn't our welfare. It's making sure the scary humans go away so you don't have to admit that they're better at protecting people than you are. The communication channel went silent again. Finally, Admiral Thompson spoke up, her voice carefully diplomatic. Council Command, we respect your authority in this sector. However, we have been formally requested to remain by the legitimate government of this colony. We will honor that request unless ordered otherwise by our own command structure. Admiral Zethkaler's response was cold and angry. This matter is not over, Admiral. The Council will hear about this.